Mr. Cruel assaulted children, abducted them, even killed one, and never left a trace. Hey guys, it's going Dudey, and I'm back with another video today. Wow, I mean, this is quite some case. He was given the name Mr. Cruel, and it is not hard to understand why. So let's take a look at the horrific crimes of Mr. Cruel. Mr. Cruel was first picked up on the police's radar when he raped an 11-year-old girl. This was in the safety of her own home. In August of 1987, in the Lower Plenty area of Melbourne, a masked man carrying a knife and a gun had got entry into the house by removing a pane of glass from the living room window. He bound and gagged the rest of the family, locking them away in a wardrobe, and then went and assaulted the young girl. Now, interestingly, he didn't leave straight away. In fact, he was in the home for around 2 hours. He even made himself some food. He took certain possessions, a jacket from the home. And weirdly, the little girl recalls hearing him on their home phone to someone on the other end, threatening what he will do to the family. Now, interestingly, police looked at the phone records to try and find, who did this guy call, because the police didn't receive a phone call, and it was discovered that no call was made. So the police decided that maybe this guy is a little bit smart and he was basically faking this phone call so that it would throw the police off the scent, lead them down the wrong pathway. December of the following year, Mr. Cruel would strike again, a few miles down the road in Ringwood. The father of the family was awoken to a gun pressed against his forehead and the words, "You're not going to be a hero, are you?" spoken into his ear. Now, him and his wife were bound using wire, and their daughter was abducted. He also took $35 from the house. Mr. Cruel regularly gave the girl Vegemite sandwiches, lemonade and milk. She was washed thoroughly, removing any DNA of Mr. Cruel, and even had her fingernails and toenails clipped. Her last task was to brush her teeth thoroughly. She was later found wearing just green bin bags in the field at a local school. And she revealed to police some key information: that she was shackled to a bed, tied around her neck was a neck brace attached to the bed, and she was able to actually see what was going on for a brief moment, and she noticed that there was a camera on a tripod, implying that these events were being filmed. It would be another year and a half before Mr. Cruel would knowingly strike again. And in July of 1990, Nicola Linus was abducted. Just 13 years old, she was at home with her 15-year-old sister, who was babysitting while their parents were at a farewell party. This farewell party was because they were moving back to the United Kingdom. Just before midnight, Mr. Cruel entered the home. He tied up the 15-year-old sister, telling her specifically that her father would have to pay $25,000 in order for Nicola's safe return. Nicola was then taken via the family's rental car that was in their drive and driven away. The rental car was later found, implying that he had transferred into a new vehicle, and it would take 50 hours before Nicola was found, but she too was released. And really interestingly, the police or the family had received no calls or communication from Mr. Cruel asking for $25,000. So in the end, there was no ransom to be paid. Now, tragically, Nicola was the victim of sexual assault at the hands of Mr. Cruel. But again, as meticulous as he would wash the victims, he would clean the victims thoroughly. There would be no trace of him whatsoever. And she was found abandoned, wearing green bin bags once again, but this time on the grounds of a substation. The final known victim to Mr. Cruel was Carmine Chan. Now, this one is very interesting because, as far as the police are aware, there was no evidence that children were at this home. So it is theorized that maybe Mr. Cruel knew of the children, his victims, beforehand, especially with Carmine, because there were never any, bicycles or toys or anything out on the front lawn. So for him to target this house specifically, prior knowledge would surely have to be known, implying that perhaps it has been thrown around the theories that he could have worked at local schools to gather intel, on the locations of his victims, but this is, of course, at this point, just a theory. So, April 1991, Carmine Chan is abducted. This is a nice house. We're talking 2-meter fences, electric gates. Normally difficult to break into, but seemingly a breeze for Mr. Cruel. He was wearing that horrendous looking balaclava mask, as well as a grey and green tracksuit. The Chan sisters, 3 of them were home alone that night, and around 9 p.m. he broke in. The youngest of the sisters were dragged away viciously and locked in a wardrobe. He did this by dragging a bed and blocking the entrance to the wardrobe, and it took them 15 minutes to break free. Bear in mind, these girls were 7 and 9 years old, so for them to have the strength to boot this door until the bed that was blocking it was pushed out of the way is incredible. But by the time they broke free, their sister was nowhere to be found. She was taken that day by Mr. Cruel. But Carmine, compared to the other girls, is different, because Carmine would never be found alive again. It's theorized that perhaps Carmine got a look at what Mr. Cruel looked like without his mask on, and this is why he felt he had no choice but to kill her. He shot her in the head 3 times and dumped her body, and it would take a year for her body to be found. And when police got to the house, Mr. Chan's vehicle was interestingly vandalized, and it had spray painted on the doors words like "payback Asian drug dealer" and more to come. Now, obviously, the police had to investigate this, but they found no evidence whatsoever that would imply that Mr. Chan was a drug dealer. Now, think back to the first crime. What did Mr. Cruel do? He faked a phone call to try and throw police off of his scent. They discovered no such phone call was made. So they came to the conclusion that Mr. Chan was no drug dealer, but Mr. Cruel bought himself time by wasting police's energy, efforts and resources in investigating Mr. Chan as a drug dealer. An investigation that came to absolutely nothing. So Mr. Cruel is clearly a clever guy. Mr. Cruel is clearly forensically switched on, because he never leaves a trace, which some theories point towards the fact that Mr. Cruel may well have been within the police force. Now, of course, with another girl missing and this one not being released, and then the eventual death of this girl, it put a lot of pressure on police to find this guy. And so the Spectrum Task Force was created specifically to catch Mr. Cruel. Apologies, my battery died, so I just had to charge my battery, but I'm back. Okay, Mr. Cruel. So this task force was underway, and, you know, they interviewed all of the surviving victims, you know, the people that were tied up at the homes, to try and get any information they can about this guy. And what they discovered was probably between 35 and 40, well built, clean shaven, softly spoken, all these little details to try and catch this man. 27,000 suspects were interviewed. 70 people were arrested because of unrelated sexual assault crimes, and 150 men were arrested because they were subscribed to, and I can't believe this exists, but they were subscribed to mail-to-order child pornography services. Over a 29-month period, it cost $4 million, and they were no closer to catching Mr. Cruel. But it has to be said, everything went cold from then on. Now, this would imply, you know, was Mr. Cruel one of the 27,000 people that they interviewed, and maybe he got a bit spooked, felt like they were closing in on him? So perhaps you could argue that this investigation, although they never found Mr. Cruel, that doesn't mean that they didn't prevent many more victims because he got spooked by the investigation. One of the things that was made public years later in 2006 was the fact that clearly this man filmed what he was doing. That allowed FBI to profile him as someone that probably collected child pornography, probably created his own child pornography. Like, this was clearly a really detestable, abhorrent human being. But ultimately nothing. The investigation is still on. There is a $1 million reward if this man is ever arrested and brought to justice. There are so many theories. There's new technology. Just the other month, at the start of March, it was revealed using new technology that it is theorized that this man probably worked as a substation engineer, because a lot of the girls were dropped at, or dropped near, or discovered at substation plots. So was this man comfortable around these areas? Did he work them? And one of the victims' houses was directly opposite one of these substations. Two of the girls went to a school that was opposite one of these power stations. So there's just like these power stations all seem to be linked heavily to this crime. So was this man a worker? Does he still work for these power stations? So that's a big thing in this case, but ultimately this is a terrifying and meticulously intelligent man that got away with the most abhorrent of crimes for the longest time. What do you guys think of Mr. Cruel? What do you think of the costume, the mask that he would wear? Absolutely chilling. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. If you would like to support me, the links are all down below. Hit that subscribe button, like, share, check out my Facebook, check out my podcast, all that good stuff. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you very soon. Sweet one. Geese.